Well, a term that you may be hearing a lot these days is xeriscaping, or something known as a low water use garden. And one of our theme gardens this year around the barn is a xeriscape garden. Well, usually when you hear that, low water use or xeriscape, you think of something like a southwest garden using a lot of cacti and succulents. But actually there's a lot of plant materials that are low water use plants. Now if you're shopping around for plants to use in a low water use garden, there are some things that you can look for. And first off, some plants that are very well adapted to conserving water are plants in the gray and silver area. And you'll notice all the plants I have here fit into that group. They have a nice silvery gray cast to them. Well, what gives them this cast is, if you'll notice here on our lamb's ears, which are appropriately named because they're so soft, all of these tiny hairs, this is what actually gives them their grayish silver cast, are just rows and rows of tiny hairs on the plant. Now, these hairs actually make a reflective surface, and so the plant reflects heat and it keeps that leaf surface cooler so that it doesn't lose as much water through transpiration. Well, another plant in this category is our Santolina. This gray Santolina here is beautiful. It's got the nice grayish cast to it, and the leaves are very small. Now, the hairs on these leaves aren't quite as obvious as they are with the lamb's ears, but that's still what gives it its cast. Another great plant in this group is our Russian sage. This works great all summer, and it has beautiful bloom as we get into the later summer. And our final plant here that we're going to be using in our xeriscape garden is our Artemisia Powis castle. And again, it's another great plant in that gray group of plants. Well, you don't want your entire garden to have a gray cast, so there are some other plants that you can use in this water conserving group as well. Now over here we have our Elaeagnus, and its water conservation method is actually a waxy coating on the leaf. Now these actually have somewhat of a silver cast, and the older leaves, you'll notice, are just a very shiny bright green color. Now a lot of the plants that use this waxy covering method of water conservation have a bluish cast to them, and rue, which is a very common herb in gardens, has that bluish cast to it. Well, moving along to some of our more shrubby plants, we have yet another method of water conservation, and that is plants that have smaller leaves. Now, all other things being equal, a plant with a smaller leaf will lose less water than a large leaf. You'll notice that people don't use bananas a lot in a xeriscape garden, and there's a reason for that. All of that leaf surface evaporates and transpires a lot of water. So these plants are very good for a low water use garden. Now this is a desert willow, and it's appropriately named because it does have the willow-like leaves. Now this is going to have a beautiful burgundy to pink bloom on it later in the summer. Well, speaking of a burgundy color, we have a beautiful Nandina here that has a lot of nice burgundy color on the foliage. Nandinas work great in a low water use garden, and they also work well in either full sun or partial shade, so you've got some leeway there in where you want to place them. Well, finally, in our plants with smaller leaves, we've got a great plant, and this is our Yaupon Holly. It has the very small leaves, and you'll notice also they have a somewhat of a bluish tint because they have a waxy coating on them. Now, even though you're going to plant these in a low water use garden, a lot of people think you just put them in the ground and you walk away from them. But the first year when you're establishing this, you'll want to watch the water closely because those plants need a little bit of time to get their roots down into the ground. So that first year you'll want to pay attention to them, but after that your garden will become more and more maintenance free. Well, now that we've seen some of the plants that work in a xeriscape garden, let's talk with Steve Owens, who's designed a beautiful garden for us here by our barn. Well, Steve, this is a really neat design, and it looks like you've taken a lot of time on this, but it's a lot different than what we had here last year, isn't it?
Yeah, the xeriscape, it's going to be a lot different than our tropical garden.
So, well, what kinds of things did you have to take into consideration when you were drawing this on paper?
Well, to start with, this bed starts out on the east side of the barn and wraps around the north end over all the way to the west side of the barn. So there's going to be a number of different little microclimates, including the area right up against the barn, say about 3 or 4 feet out, is going to be predominantly in the shade all day.
Well, sometimes it's kind of hard to find plants that work well in a shady area but are also drought tolerant, isn't it?
That's right, and that's why we went with shrubs, to give us some height in the back of the design and some backbone. And we chose the plants because of their size and texture. And we have this Yaupon Holly next to the Nandina right here for a nice contrast in foliage and texture. And we have a group of 3 of these. If you look at most of these plants, they're in groups of 3s. The Artemisia, the nice silver color, is a nice contrast is in color and texture to the Nandina as well.
Those 2 different colors of green look really nice together.
Yes, I think so. That was one of the things we were looking at in that. Now down here we have a Kubas, and this really sticks out because it almost looks like a plastic plant.
It does.
Next to this gray Artemisia, and again, the little bit larger leaf with a little bit of yellow. I mean, that's a really nice color contrast right there. And then we have the llex back here, even a different type of leaf. And over in this area behind the llex, we're going to put some bamboo, and it's going to be a tall plant, and that will balance the height of the Yaupon Holly on the other side.
Okay, so that was something that you wanted a balance on both sides with some shorter in the middle.
That's right.
So, well, this works out really nice. Well, we've got all of these plants out here in containers, and even though you've gotten it drawn out on paper, it's a really pretty good idea to set them all out and maybe work with them a little bit, isn't it?
Yes, that helps, because what you draw on paper is not always the case when you get out in the yard or in your bed and you start moving these around. You might come up with a combination that looks better while you're out in the bed with the plants in the pots, moving them around, than when you're at your desk with pencil and paper drawing out the plan.
That's right, but it's a little easier to move them around in pots than it is to dig them up and move them around.
No, that's right, Brenda.
The only thing that people need to remember if they're going to do this is that their plants are going to be about 1 foot to 1.5 foot shorter when they're doing this.
Yeah, as these are sitting here, you can see they look a lot taller than what they will actually be, because once you plant them, you don't have the height of the pot there. So always remember that the plants are going to be sitting lower than they are right now.
Okay, well, in addition to these shrubs and things, you've also got a lot of annual plants and things that we're going to fill in around this with, aren't we?
Yeah, we have lots of herbaceous foliage and flowering plants that are xeric in nature to go with the shrubs.
So, well, we'll get started on planting these, and we'll be anxious to come back and see how this looks when we get it all filled in.
All right.
We hope you enjoyed this video. It's part of our OK Gardening Classics YouTube channel. You can also find more recent videos on our Oklahoma Gardening YouTube channel. And join us on social media for great gardening tips, photos, and discussion.